Hello and welcome back to episode 32 of the Experience Lounge podcast. Thanks for coming back. Lovely for you to join us. And we hope everyone's doing well. Before we jump into some very exciting HR tech news updates and a very exciting topic, if I do say so myself today, which is EX strategy. Laura, how are you doing? What's the life update?
I'm good, thank you. The UK has had a heat wave and I live up north. I think people might know that by now. And so when it hits up north, it's a big one. So
It's a real one.
we have, like 27, 28 degrees. When I went to London on Monday, I think it was 31. And typical British, I think, we moan when it's too cold, too hot, and when it rains. But I think it's because unlike when I lived in Singapore, there's aircon everywhere, right? There just isn't. So you sit, like I'm even sat in my home office today. It's not as hot today, but it's going to get hot again with the window open and just thinking it's just really warm. So,
and mate, you lived in Singapore.
No, I know, but I just think to myself, Singapore has got it down to a T, aircon everywhere.
Yeah.
You know what you're letting yourself in for, right? And you wouldn't do stupid stuff unless you were perhaps in gym kit, like walking, 25 minutes outside, unless you are wearing active wear. Whereas here, it's like hit and miss, and obviously at home nobody has. So for me, the biggest life update is just trying to keep cool like the rest of the UK. And then we've got another scorcher of a weekend from what I hear, which is nice. Time in the garden. That's when I like living in our own house and stuff. So yeah.
It's
How about
barbecue
you?
weather.
It is. We had one last week. Very nice.
Oh, very nice. And do you know what I don't miss about the UK though is people walking shirtless around supermarkets when it gets too hot.
Yeah.
It's not
there
that
is a
hot.
lot of flesh. Like my mum will say to me quite a bit, like, "Oh, I don't think there should be that much on show."
It's just no one asked for it. Like it's not that hot. Neither are you. Put your shirt back on.
No.
So yes, that's the one thing I don't miss. It's a crime to do that here, right? In Singapore, it's pretty subjective, but like it's whatever they deem nudity, and so it would be asked as classed as nudity. But anyway, well, I'm glad you're enjoying the sunny weather. I caught up with my mum before this episode and she was saying the same thing. She was like, oh my goodness, it's a scorcher. We've got the Tesco 8-pack of kebabs out. We're ready for the barbecue tonight after work. I'm like, oh, great, mum. That's fantastic. So yeah, no, I am really pleased for you. And it seems like I'm waffling a bit here, but everyone is in Greece or in Spain right now. Everything I see on social media.
I would say that on my Instagram, yeah. Or
Crazy.
Ibiza, actually, I've seen a few people too.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's getting to holiday season. Like here in the UK, it's only a week and a half, I think, till most schools break up. So people are going early, and lots of people seem to be away.
Goodness. Well, I am actually loving the content, and we've got a few friends that are in like Mykonos and Santorini. My sister-in-law just got back from her holidays in Santorini, her honeymoon actually. And it looks gorgeous. So
Santorini
enjoy it.
Is gorgeous.
If you're listening from the UK or Europe and you're on your holidays, congratulations, make the most of it. But all is well here. I am 27 weeks pregnant, so I'm actually feeling good. I'm not going to complain unnecessarily. If you're a woman who's been pregnant before, or you're someone that's been pregnant before and you're listening to this podcast, you'll know that there are lots of truly horrific and disgusting things that go on with your body during pregnancy. But I actually think the universe is being quite kind to me this week at least. So no complaints there. I'll stop talking about that before people are like, oh God, no, we didn't come on this. Come to listen to this for the pregnancy updates. But otherwise, all good. And about to kick off a research engagement on Monday. So I'm super excited about that. So
exciting.
Always good fun. And also personal update, but also a plug for our socials. I have started a course with IDOU. I think that's how I'm supposed to say that, IDOU, called Designing Strategy. And I was a sucker to the adverts, and I thought, let's have a look at the syllabus. And it looked really interesting. And I have to say, I'm on the week 0 content at the moment, but so far so good. And I am documenting the experience over on our Instagram account. So if you are interested in taking up a course with like IDEO or Luma Institute, both really kind of well-known design thinking course providers, go and check out our Instagram and you can follow the journey there. But so far, so good.
And is it one where you do it like self-paced learning?
It is, but there's lots of opportunities to collaborate. So you're all kind of working and on the same portal. So you're seeing people's responses to questions, and they do weekly Zoom calls 3 times a week that you can join. Now, if you're in Asia, it's a bit of a pain because like the most convenient time is 6 a.m. But if you can make it, great, and you get to kind of catch up with people. And I will say, one of the things that I often have a bugbear with is I join these courses and there are people that, if you know what I mean, different levels of experience, and sometimes you don't find anyone that you really like gel with or that you want to continue the kind of connection with. There are lots of really interesting and actually very senior folks on this course. So I would recommend it from a networking perspective as well. I think there's about 40 or 50 people doing it at the same time. So,
and if it's 6 a.m., is it then US based then? Or
largely catered to the US audience, I think. And actually, you can do it as a team as well. So, like Laura, for example, if you wanted your team to go and do this designing strategy course together, there are people who are part of the same innovation team.
Cool.
Yeah, doing it together, which is really nice. Actually, a nice shared learning experience. But anyway, goodness, I'm full of beans today. I've got so much to say. So let's jump into the HR tech news quickly before we get into today's topic of discussion. So a few stories, first of all. So the first one comes from our good friend Josh Bursin. And we've spoken about this platform loads. Gloat, one of the leading players in the talent marketplace space, announced a $90 million investment from Generation Investment Management, the firm led by AI Gore. I won't go into too much detail here. We will always leave the links in the show notes if you want to go and check it out. But again, Gloat just going from strength to strength. Not surprised to see it. Laura, any thoughts?
No, just that. Well, it is a really good platform, I think, in terms of helping organisations to move a bit more to that gig economy, because the way that it works is you would post roles on an internal talent marketplace and then people can apply for those roles. So I think it's a great opportunity when you think from an employee experience perspective for people to be able to then do different types of work. And I think it is the start of bringing that kind of mechanism for an internal gig economy. So I think it is a good platform. Definitely.
Yeah,
exciting.
We love it here. Yeah, fabulous. And we're not sponsored by them, but if Gloat want to throw some cash our way, we've done enough to plug them. That would be great. Next one it's a bit of an article. Actually, 2 of these are newsletter spotlights. So if you are not following David Green on LinkedIn, 100% go and follow him. He does a monthly roundup of the best EX, HR analytics, and kind of digital HR papers. And so like this is proper good research that he is promoting, and he shares it on a monthly basis. So 100% go and check that out. Our podcast has been featured on his newsletter before, so obviously we love it and we love David Green. So go and check out his newsletter. There is a particularly interesting article that I wanted to call out called How to Adapt Your Employee Listening Strategy to Support Remote and Hybrid Working. I will leave that specifically linked in the show notes. Really interesting because we talk a lot about EX listening here. So this talks a lot about how can you very quickly and rapidly respond to EX insights. And the article itself also gives you some examples. So if you're new to employee listening and you're looking to do more around kind of pulsing the organization, it's really fantastic. And 100% go and check that out. The other newsletter that I wanted to spotlight is from our good friends at TI People. It's called the EX Intelligence Quarterly. I don't know if this is new, but at least I've only just come across it. Have you seen this before?
Don't think so.
Okay. So as it sounds, it's a quarterly update, and it's pulled together by Dr. and I really hope I'm getting this right, Dr. Timo Tischer, who I know listens to our podcast. So shout out to him. Really great work. If you are looking for a good roundup of EX research on a quarterly basis, go and check that out as well. You can find the link in the show notes. So those were the kind of key things we wanted to call out, which will hopefully be really useful for you. The last thing, which really came in over the last couple of days and is something that Laura and I have been talking about, is People Management Magazine, who are, I think, the publication of the CIPD, right?
Yeah, in the UK.
Yeah. So they recently released their latest, I think it's on a quarterly basis, magazine. And the front cover has caused quite a stir. So it says, "Does HR have a diversity problem?" And this is kind of caught on social media, and we've seen this really blow up over the last couple of days, and rightly so. Like super glad that this is getting the attention it needs. Calling out specifically here Shireen Daniels, who both Laura and I are connected with on LinkedIn. She is being super vocal around this and really sharing some amazing gems of insights and her wisdom. She does a lot in this space. She runs an organization called HR Rewired, which is dedicated to helping organizations become more inclusive and less racist. And so go and check her out on LinkedIn. We'll leave her profile in the bio. But Laura, any thoughts on this?
I think seeing the debate on LinkedIn, that's where I've seen a number of people post about it, and I think it's a really, really important topic, and actually one where some of the posts I read, it really made me think and sort of stop and think about, as a HR professional, what am I doing? How does this impact me? So I'd love to get Shireen on at some point. Actually, I think if she would be interested in coming on, we can sort of reach out and ask her. But I just think it's a really important conversation that we need to be having. And what was interesting is there was quite a bit of reaction to the original post, which I then just felt, and I think she made the comment too, then just reinforces her points that she was making. It makes you feel uncomfortable, and that's part of it, I think. So I'd love to get her on, because I think it would be a really, really important conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to get her on. So we will be, and we have ordered a copy of the Anti-Racist Organization, which is her book. So we will enjoy reading that. We'll share our thoughts, and then, like you say, hopefully get her on the podcast as well. That would be amazing, and what a treat.
It would.
And I know what you mean. There were some people replying to her original post saying, not me, don't include me. And I'm like, this is the All Lives Matter response.
It is,
just stop doing it. And Shireen rightly kind of responded in a follow-up post. So go and check them out. But those are just a few things we wanted to call out. So it's been a busy old week in the HR, tech and EX space. And so let's jump into today's topic, which is building an employee experience strategy in 2022. Now, I feel like this could be probably part of a series. We've got a lot to say about the kind of strategy design process here. But today we wanted to talk a bit about who should be involved in building an EX strategy. So if you're new to this, some thoughts around who you should consult with and who should be part of your extended EX crew. Then we'll talk a little bit about what are the core areas of focus for a good EX strategy in 2022 and beyond, because there's lots of really topical things that are really important. And then we'll wrap up with a look at, from a human-centered design perspective, from an EX design perspective, how can we ensure the EX strategy build process is truly design-led and EX-centric. So with that said, Laura, when building your EX strategy, who should be involved?
So I've got two views on this, I think, depending on the maturity of where you're at in your organisation. So for me, the ideal way to build your EX strategy would be that at the core focus is employee data, your employee listening, your ethnographic research, your human-centered design, all of that data and insight that employees have given you that then helps inform, these are the, say, top 5 things this year that we should go after from an EX perspective. Now, I say that with a caveat that I think as HR professionals, there would always be insight and thought leadership externally that we would want to bring to the business that they might not have considered or thought of, or particularly in your HR business partner roles where they are partnering most closely with the business, that you're bringing some of that insight in. So for me, it would be that you've got that employee centricity, but then you also have maybe one or two strands of that strategy that are perhaps the preparing for the future. How do you build, some of that thinking in? And why I say that's the ideal scenario, because the reality is, I think, depending on the maturity of your organization, I think the first bit I mentioned around the employee voice may not be as accessible depending on where you're actually at. So therefore, the other way to look at it is, if you do have a kind of people or HR strategy that might have been built through what your business tells you are some of the key challenges, even as HR professionals, that you sort of think through, these are key focus areas, or even that bit of outside in, how can you then, with that people strategy, pivot it so it still then aligns and builds out an EX strategy? And perhaps an example of that might be, you've decided at the start of the year that you want to focus on changing the performance culture in the organization, because that might be a really key priority from a business perspective. Then how do you anchor that around making sure you're getting employee insight and data and doing your EX research? That's how I think you can kind of pivot it, if you haven't then done I guess it's the kind of grounds up, right, is what I'm saying in terms of that data. So that's almost how I look at it. And then I think key kind of actors or players in developing that EX strategy, obviously employees, I think one of the biggest stakeholders. And then, as I alluded to with the kind of business lens, I think there's also the piece around strategically as an organization, what's the direction from a business perspective that we're heading towards, and how do we build that into the EX strategy? But what do you think? Who else? I'm sure there's others.
No, I totally agree with you. And I think along the same lines, maturity lines, I also wanted to call out that who you involve will also be dictated largely by the maturity of EX as a concept across your organization. And so when I talk with clients or prospective clients, actually, one of the questions that I ask is, we're building an EX strategy together. Is this a HR EX strategy, or is this an organization EX strategy? And I think the narrative externally and in the kind of consulting market is, your EX strategy has to be enterprise wide. Otherwise, it's not employee experience, it's HR experience. And I agree with that in principle, but you have to start somewhere. And often it starts in HR. So as I say, when I talk to some clients, I like to just understand, who are we catering this to? And that does influence the content of the strategy, because if it's a new concept and it's starting in HR, we're going to see more HR service elements. We're going to see more elements of people experience as it sits within HR. Whereas if we've got something that's maybe more mature, we'll look at things that are slightly broader across the organization, like, for example, enterprise service experience. And if that's the case, then if it is an enterprise employee experience strategy, then we'll start to pull in different players from other parts of the organization. So, for example, IT, finance, facilities, bringing in all of those people who ultimately have an impact and a say in what the holistic employee experience is. So facilities, because it's where we work, IT, because they're also a service provider. And normally when I talk to clients, they have an aspiration from a digital perspective that the experience of getting service from IT, finance, and HR feels the same. It's the same look and feel from a platform perspective, and they want the same kind of experience principles. So if that's the case, if you're more mature and it is an enterprise experience strategy, then yes, you want to start thinking about what are the other touch points in the employee experience ecosystem, and who do I need to bring in to represent those touch points, those elements of the experience that our employees have. That's what I would add. And I mean, there's no right or wrong. Of course, enterprise experience is where you want to get to, and hopefully you will get to that point where you have this like lovely diverse group of lots of different stakeholders. But with that comes complexity. But again, we'll probably talk to that another time. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's true. I sort of almost see it a bit on a maturity matrix in terms of where your EX function or how you're driving EX across the organization may sit. And I'd also probably say if you are more in the camp that it's perhaps more of a HR EX strategy, also though thinking through how can you pull in those other functions like property, finance, tech into parts of that. And I think good examples of that is if you decided to focus, for example, on onboarding, or if you were saying hybrid working is a really key employee experience initiative that we're going to go after this year, they're ones where there are really clear parts of that experience which are not HR owned in the sort of traditional sense. And so that might be a way actually that you could get some of those players involved in that strategy, so that then if you were building your 2023 one, it might be more holistic across the organization. And then I think the other piece is, which again to me is linked to the maturity point we've raised, but the linkage to CX and how can you bring the lens of customer experience. And typically organizations that would be more mature in their outlook would have been able to make that connection. And we've talked about it before on the podcast with customer experience, but that to me would almost be the ultimate strategy, that there's very clear synergies between the outcomes of what you're driving from an EX perspective and how that actually creates a better customer experience and therefore more revenue for your organization ultimately.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that also falls into, like, you've got the data category, so we can actually start to maybe explore as a proof of concept the linkage between EX and CX, which I think we talk about so conceptually at the moment. But the second piece is also just aligning on experience as an organization. Like, how do we talk about experience, whether that's customer experience or employee experience? And I think you're right, extending, even if you're in the early stages of EX and this is maybe your first EX strategy, at least getting familiar with how we talk about experience at the organization will be really beneficial. It makes things seem more cohesive, people will understand it more, and you might find some good little gems of wisdom as well. I think the only other group that I would call out at this point would be, as always, your diversity, equity, and inclusion teams. They would be part of that process, because you want to make sure that, one, what you're doing is aligned with their strategy and you're both working together to achieve your goals. And two, also, you always want to make sure you're bringing in those diverse perspectives, right? So if you're not getting that from your employee groups necessarily, you've got that check and balance as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They're definitely a key player as well.
Yeah, for sure. So that's a quick one on who should be involved. Second topic is, given the current market conditions and the hype around hybrid working, return to the office, we've seen so many things that are topical. We've spoken about it, Roe v. Wade, like all of this, so much going on this year. What are some of the core areas of focus for a good EX strategy this year and probably in 2023 as well?
So I think for me, it is that piece, and we do this quite a lot with the tech news updates or topical discussions where we've chosen to make it a topic on the podcast. Is a good part of being an EX professional for me is that you have one lens, which is always externally what's going on in the market, what can I bring in outside in from a thought leadership perspective, how am I connecting with other EX professionals or HR people, again, from different organizations. And we were just talking earlier, weren't we, about some conversations that we've had with different organizations, and that sort of perspective I think is really key. So for me, it can be a challenge though sometimes to pick which ones, because there's a lot that is sort of happening externally, and you could almost, I think, if you try to go after everything, it would definitely be too much. But that's where I think for me it's a balance of, when you're doing your employee listening, when you're going out and talking to your employees and doing human-centered design thinking and really getting that richness of data around what our current challenges, then sort of almost doing that matching between what are we hearing externally in the market and what are our colleagues also telling us is really important and impactful for them. And I think some of those that I've seen certainly would be things like hybrid working, that when you think of the last 2 years during the pandemic, and now we're sort of coming out to, the new normal, that hasn't gone away. It isn't going to go away. We've talked in previous episodes about how that is now a competitive advantage, it also has massive implications from a diversity and inclusion perspective, but then further challenges that organisations need to work through around things like proximity bias now, as typically you're seeing more men go back to the office and women work from home. So I think it's sort of doing that kind of matching and really then going after the ones that are hot in the market, but also actually make sense in terms of future-proofing your organisation. So I say hybrid working because to me that is a core enabler of redesigning work, the future of work. And so that would definitely be a top one for me. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you raised a really good point around kind of like what's going on in the market, what are people saying, and matching the two, because just because it's topical in the market doesn't necessarily mean that your people care about it, right? And that could also be sector driven as well. And like if you work in like an incredibly male dominated industry, like, you know, coming in with female reproductive health work stream for your EX strategy when you work construction might not cut it. And again, not making any assumptions there about construction, but you know, just saying. So yeah, I agree with you. The one thing I always say to clients is I think an integral part of an EX strategy is always a piece around managers. And investing in managers and enabling managers. And I think that's just because we know that the managers are the custodians of experience in an organization, and we can never do enough to help them and to help them shape those experiences and just drive better experiences for their people. And so I definitely think that's always got to be a work stream, but the flavor of that kind of work stream will change. So at the moment, it could be things like how do we equip our managers to, you know, manage hybrid teams? How do we equip our managers? And this is one I've worked on quite recently, to have better performance conversations. And within that, there are many kind of sub elements there around diversity and equity and inclusion. And so I always think if you are looking at kind of what do we need to include in the EX strategy, something around managers and helping them shape and create great experiences is always a solid one for me. But what do you think, Laura?
Yeah, I completely agree, because I think nowadays there's a lot hitting people leaders, and that's not to say, because I think there's always the debate where you hear quite a lot that people are promoted into roles as a people leader because they're really good in a technical skill. And there is that debate of do we start to, and some organisations are already doing this, but do you start to go down the track of some people who are at a certain level of seniority because they're just a technical expert in that field, but they don't have people leader responsibility, because the two don't go hand in hand, that just because you've historically maybe been a great individual contributor that you would necessarily be a good people leader. But I think that said, there's a lot that we're now asking people leaders to be. So we're asking people leaders to manage their teams in a different way when you think of the context around hybrid working, when we think about things like managing diverse and inclusive teams. And I think not always necessarily providing people leaders the right support and guidance to be able to do some of that, like almost just assuming, you know, some of these different ways of working would come in. We expect people leaders to be able to adapt and to do it. And so I think you're right, the sort of focus on different parts of that people leader experience, I think, are really key in any EX strategy, because they are a core persona that I think should be a focus. I think the other that I've seen when I sort of, you know, have conversations with colleagues in other parts and peers in other parts of where I work, but also actually outside of my organisation, I think one key trend this year, which we have already done an episode on, is just around the Great Resignation and retention. That feels like that is such a hot topic at the moment, and I've not found in my kind of interactions and discussions with other organisations that isn't an issue kind of unilaterally at the moment. And I think some of that is the sort of 2 years we had in the pandemic, where I think lots of people, because of the uncertainty of that, stuck with the organisations that they were in. And now you've got this dynamic where people know what they want, I think, in a different way about how they want to work. And the market is so hot now. I think it is so much more a candidate driven market. Like, I don't actually think during the interview process it's so much of a I think historically it sort of used to be the organization was seeing if you were the right fit, and I just feel like that power dynamic has shifted, and now it's does the individual feel like that's the right organization for them? And people seem to have multiple offers on the table from lots of different organizations. So that one for me would be sort of be a key focus, and think about in your sort of moments that matter in your employee journey, what are some of the things? Because I think sometimes as well, we focus too much on the point at which people have then already decided to leave. But actually, if you're thinking from a broader retention perspective, that there will have been multiple experiences that will have impacted that individual negatively, that would have contributed to their decision to leave the organization. So it's understanding from your listening and insight, what are those things, and fixing those as part of your strategy that then hopefully leads the outcome that there is higher retention of talent you want to retain. Because I think you said before, healthy churn is still important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I think it is super topical. And I mean, it goes without saying that, just to kind of clarify here, we're talking about things that are relevant because of the trends and the current market situation, typically regardless of the industry you work in or your organization. But it's always to say that when you're making a decision around what goes into your EX strategy, what is pertinent to the organization at this point. And so, for example, when I talk to clients, we go through a discovery phase, and this is where I will go fact finding to say, okay, what are the attrition numbers this year? How do they compare over the current years? What are the business priorities? What's the overall business strategy? Are we moving into new markets? Are we looking to, diversify our product portfolio? And then working back from there to say, okay, how do the elements of the EX strategy support the overall business strategy? It sounds really simple, but I just kind of want to clarify. We're throwing out some ideas here, but it has to be relevant to your organization. Otherwise, people will look at it and be like, what a joke. Jokey strategy, not going to impact anything. The only other one that I wanted to throw in here, and I'm conscious of time, we could talk about this for ages, is listening. And again, this is another one that I say always alongside the manager experience piece, is listening, because this is an evolution, and there are so many amazing platforms emerging constantly, and they're bringing out amazing innovation that our understanding of employee listening and experience measurement is constantly changing. We've seen Fount come out this year. We had an episode on that. I work with a lot of clients, and they always ask me the same question, how can we mature our experience measurement? And so I think for that reason, having listening maturity, experience measurement maturity as part of like a fundamental element of your strategy, I think is really important. But Laura, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's thinking more holistically about what employee listening actually means. So that for me is different types of surveying. That there is still a place for your annual employee engagement survey, absolutely. But we need to move a shift, I think, away from some of that. So you're also doing pulse surveys, that you're then supplementing some of that employee listening strategy with your ethnographic research, your human-centered design, and just thinking of different ways that you get that insight. And then I think working really closely with your people insights and analytics teams to then overlay things like attrition data, demographic data. And one that I would like to tap into a bit more actually is even then some of the sentiment analysis data that you might get from things like, if you use ServiceNow as your case management platform, how can you get insight in terms of actually what are people writing in the cases? Because that gives you a different lens in terms of frustrations, things that people are finding challenging. So for me, it's really multifaceted. So it's sort of thinking through, where are you on that maturity curve from a listening perspective, and what else could you augment to then get that richness of data? And then, like you say, it's a kind of science at the moment that is just continually evolving, and there's so many different providers out there, and part of the challenge is picking which one of those works for your organization. They don't all do the same thing, so there is that as well, and being clear on your sort of North Star, like what are you saying is kind of your key data measurements, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with you. I think one more just to throw into the mix, and we'll probably have to keep the third topic for another episode because I think that's a whole beast in itself.
Yes.
But another one, which I think is quite topical and is linked to a previous point, is around diversity. So we're talking a lot, and I'm hearing a lot about the trans experience at work, for example, and I think that is incredibly relevant for organizations. And I think whilst typically we'd see the diversity, equity and inclusion teams kind of spearheading a lot of that really important conversation and hopefully action to follow, I think it's got to form part of your employee experience strategy as well. And I actually think it'd be really useful for us to have an episode on this as well. Maybe we can get the amazing Gemma Saunders back, or if she's got somebody else that she would recommend, or if you're listening and you've got someone that can talk to the trans experience at work and how that relates to employee experience, we'd absolutely love you to come on. So please do reach out. But I think that's really, really important because, we're kind of looking at, how do organizations embrace pronouns, for example, and what's the trans experience of going off on maternity leave, for example. And I think these are really important conversations to be having. And so I would say this year, having that as a focus on your EX strategy, and especially into next year, is important. What do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think the other bit that's sort of been front of mind for me is, in your EX strategy, how can you be more proactive to think about things that might be happening in the market? So our discussion a couple of weeks ago around Roe versus Wade, some of that you would have had a view that was going to happen a few months ago based on things that I think had been leaked, and it felt like that was the decision that was unfortunately going to be made. But the sort of thing I've been kind of thinking a lot about is, as organizations thinking about employee experience, how do you, I don't know if preempt's the right word, but how do you make sure that you're proactively thinking about some of these topics that are going to be really, really challenging for some of your employees? And like we said with the Roe versus Wade conversation, not necessarily always needing to even have a position, but actually that you understand how you're going to support and provide employees with the right experience that makes them feel included and wanted, and that it is still a positive experience for them. So I don't have the answer for that, actually. It's a real kind of live topic, and to me it also links a bit to a theme. I listened to a Brene Brown podcast a few months ago around employee activism, and it's just a really live topic that's just been something I've been thinking a lot about. And I think that's something, as you're building out your EX strategy, like how do you pivot, or sort of how do you proactively respond? Because there's a lot happening in the world right now, and organizations, I think, do need to be able to respond to some of it and be quite agile around that, I think, as well.
Yeah, totally agree. Really, really good point. So, as I said, we do have a third topic, but we've just obviously loved this conversation so much. We've got so much to say about EX strategy. We'll park that for the next episode that we do together. And just to recap, topic 3 is, how do we bring in that human-centered design piece, particularly around the preparing and prototyping of an EX strategy. So actually really getting into the build process. So we'll cover that in the next episode. As always, reach out to us if you've got opinions on this. If you have built an EX strategy this year and there's something that you think is an absolute gem, a golden nugget, and we've missed it off, do let us know. Constantly learning and evolving. And actually, would love the learning, right?
Yeah, 100%. I always, I would say I try and adopt that learning agility mindset. Definitely don't have all the answers, so want to stay curious, and if people do have other ideas, really keen to hear them, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn, etc. Obviously going through this designing strategy course as well, so maybe my opinion will change at the end of this 5-week course, who knows? So make sure you're following us over on there. And I guess a call as well here, if you were listening to this podcast and you're thinking, oh, I'm not a very confident speaker, or like maybe I'm not good enough to be a guest on a podcast, or I've got something interesting to say but I need a platform, we are your platform. So if you are listening, please reach out. We would love to have you on. There is just so many interesting people in the industry, so please reach out. We want to get more diverse voices on this podcast, and we're totally cognizant of that. So if you are listening and you've got something to say, reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Cool.
Definitely. Cool.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great week or weekend, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.